Yash, thank you very much for being here today.
My pleasure.
We just want to have a start by asking you to tell a little bit more about WellSpan. What do you guys do here in India? You're a very respected company here, but bear in mind that this goes to many members from all over the world.
Of course.
What can you tell them?
Of course. So to start with, WellSpan as a group is a large, diversified Indian conglomerate. So the parent company has business interests across different sectors, including textiles, line pipes, steel, oil and gas, flooring, and a number of other businesses which they have now gotten into. So as a group, we do about $3 billion of revenue annually. We employ close to 30,000 people. We have 4 listed companies with a combined market cap, which is in the vicinity, I think, of $5 billion. So very large as a group. Our business inside of the group is a business which focuses on warehousing and industrial real estate in India. And we're structured as an integrated fund and development management platform focused on industrial and warehousing real estate pan-India. What that means really is that our business is a combination of 2 businesses. One part of it is a private equity fund business, in our case, one which focuses exclusively on real estate, and inside of real estate on warehousing and industrial. And like any other fund business, we raise capital from third-party LPs and source and execute and manage deals on behalf of those LPs. But along with the fund, we also have an integrated development company. Unlike a fund which will only be on the investing side of things, we are able to execute the real estate side of the cycle as well, right? Which means that once I've raised money from my LPs, once I've done a deal, and doing a deal for me is really buying a piece of land because we're mostly focused today on greenfield development. But once we've bought the land, we're able to do everything which goes after that without having to depend on a third-party developer partner. So what that means is that once we've bought the land, everything starting from zoning and permitting to master planning and design, project management and execution, sales, leasing, property management, operations, we're able to execute all of this with our in-house team.
Fantastic. And when you compare warehousing, logistics, industrial logistics with other asset classes in the industry, we hear that in some areas there are some oversupply, in others the demand is still very solid. What's your analysis?
Sure. So let me kind of break that down into 2 parts maybe, right? So one, if you kind of look at India and if you kind of look at the story more directionally, right? I think the macros actually look great and they look very, very promising, right? And we have really seen that play out over the last 4 or 5 years. And just to elaborate on that, if you kind of think about metrics like per capita stock, India is at about 0.1 square feet of warehousing stock per capita, right? If you compare that with China, China is about 50 times as much, right? If you compare that with the US is probably close to 250 times as much, right? To put that into context, what that means is if you kind of look at pan-India warehousing stock today, it's about 300 million square feet. That's approximately the same amount of warehousing stock you'd find in Boston City, right?
No.
So think about that. One city in the US has the same amount of warehousing stock we have as a country, right? That's not to say that India is not going to become China or the US anytime soon. Of course, it's a long process till when we get there. But having said that, the point I'm trying to make here is that the gap is just so large that even if you end up closing 20% of that gap, that still gives you a very, very long runway for growth. So again, directionally, I think the story is very, very solid. A little bit like office. And I always compare warehousing as where office was maybe in 2005 or 2006, right? And we've now had the benefit of looking at the last, 15 or 20 years of cycle play out on office, where we have seen office grow as a market, where we've now looked at about 700 to 800 million square feet of institutional office stock being developed, traded, and then ultimately a lot of that has ended up in the 3 listed REITs which we have. I think warehousing is seeing a similar journey and a similar trajectory, except that it's probably going to be in half the time or even faster, right? And for 2 reasons. One is that warehousing, just by the nature of the product which you're building, has much faster development turnaround times, right? And 2, I think we have the benefit of, now trying to build that ecosystem in a market which is, significantly more advanced and developed compared to where we started off with office maybe in 2005.
Right.
The other part of that, I think, is in terms of where the sector is today. And clearly, I think we've had a good run for the last 4 or 5 years. But this is a cyclical industry, right? So currently, we are at that point in the cycle where I think, especially over the last 4 to 6 quarters, we're starting to feel some pain in terms of demand, which is kind of reflecting in terms of the kind of rental growth we've seen. Having said that, I do think it is something which will start to turn around, maybe by the end of this year or early next year. And I think one of the key drivers of that is e-commerce demand coming back in a meaningful manner, and which I think has not been there over the last 6 to 8 quarters.
When you look at the market, there are many players in the same asset class as you guys are. There's some good competition, but there are some players making some mistakes. What are the most common mistakes you see when you look around?
Yeah, to be honest, if you kind of look at a lot of our competitors, I don't think warehousing is one sector where people haven't made a lot of mistakes, right? And that's one of the great things about warehousing as an asset class, is also that it is something which is inherently kind of de-risked vis-a-vis a lot of the other real estate, you see on the spectrum. And I say that for 2 reasons, right? One is that warehousing, at least in the format it's developed in India, and, the format of business which we and I think a lot of our competitors do, is predominantly a build-to-suit business, which means that once I buy the land, I don't build the building till I have a back-to-back lease commitment with my tenant, right? So that kind of de-risks the product which you're building to a large extent very early in the journey. The second, like I mentioned, inherently the product which you're building or the project which you're building is not very complicated. Warehouses are basically, prefabricated steel sheds. You're able to build this within a matter of months and not years, right? And to that extent, because of lower project complexity and, faster turnaround time, there are just fewer moving parts, right? Compared to, let's say if I was building a large multi-story office development or a residential development, fairly complex with a lot of moving parts, long development cycles. But warehousing doesn't have that, right? Because of which the likelihood of ending up with a large cost or time overrun in warehousing is inherently lower than what you would typically expect in any other type of real estate. So the challenge in warehousing, however, and I think where a lot of us have kind of struggled with being able to commit or deploy capital, is being able to buy large volumes of land, right? Which is really the first step of being able to build a project. And that, I think, does continue to be a difficult exercise in the Indian context, where buying large volumes of land is, I would say, a difficult and time-consuming process. Having said that, if I kind of talk about WellSpan, I think that's one of the areas where we've been able to create a little bit of a competitive edge, given the fact that, we're a homegrown Indian company, which is, been in India for the last 40 or 50 years in terms of operating as a business and as a group. And to that extent, we're able to, I think, navigate the nuances of land acquisition, perhaps more successfully than some of the international capital in the market.
Yash, thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. My pleasure.